How the hell did Hamas survive? It has been 16 months since Israel started operations in the Gaza Strip under the pretense of destroying Hamas. Since then, Israel has dropped tens of thousands of bombs with the collective destructive force of multiple nuclear bombs, utterly devastating the Gaza Strip. Nearly 100% of the civilian population has been displaced, with complete destruction of infrastructure and several pockets of famine across the Strip. And yet, despite what many agencies have called a campaign of genocide in Gaza, Hamas continues to fight. During this time, Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire, Bashar al-Assad fell, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant got replaced, the Democrats lost the election to Donald Trump, Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Iran, Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated in Lebanon, and Yahya Sinwar was killed while fighting in Gaza. And Hamas is still fighting. In fact, their number of fighting men has increased, not decreased, which begs the question, how? The answer is, wait, you didn't think I was going to give it to you that easy, did you? Now don't get it twisted, the answer is actually quite simple on its surface, but I need you to appreciate all the little details because for all the horrors we are seeing come out of Gaza, it truly is a fascinating display of resilient resistance. So let's get into it, but first, let's rewind a bit. In the aftermath of October 7th, Israel declared it would invade Gaza and destroy Hamas. Many experts agreed that this was a mistake because a resistance movement like Hamas isn't just an organization, it's an idea. And ideas are bulletproof. You can't bomb or kill the idea of resistance. And on top of that, Hamas is a decentralized resistance movement designed from the ground up to withstand the loss of any and all leadership. So if Hamas were to be destroyed, it would likely just be replaced by something else the next day. The only way to effectively end resistance is to remove any and all reason for resistance, which means making peace and respecting the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Until then, actually destroying the resistance is near impossible. And it's because of a very simple concept, asymmetric warfare. Now, obviously, you know that the resistance isn't a standard army capable of resisting Israel head-on. So guerrilla groups like Hamas fight to their strengths. This means hit and run, ambushing, random rocket fire, etc. And in the words of Henry Kissinger, the conventional army loses if it does not win. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. So you see, survival is a fundamental aspect of a resistance force like Hamas. The way these groups win is by making sure they don't lose, which as modern history has shown us many times, from World War II to Vietnam, is much easier to accomplish than quote-unquote winning. So by declaring that they would completely eradicate Hamas, Israel set themselves up for failure because they gave the resistance one objective: survive. And that is something Hamas is specifically designed to do. So even after a year of intense bombings, besieging, starving, bulldozing, sniping, Israel is nowhere near eradicating the resistance. Since November of 2023, over 15 months ago, the IDF has dropped over 100,000 tons of explosives on Gaza. 100,000 tons. They have dropped so many bombs that the US has had to rush them many more tons of bombs several times. You would think that after all of this destruction, the siege, and the lack of food and water, the resistance would be rushing to the negotiation table, that they would be willing to accept any deal and surrender. But Hamas has refused to go down, and they seem to be quite committed to going another year if need be, maybe more. But how? The resistance, and Hamas in particular, have two very powerful advantages. One, their cellular organizational structure, and two, their underground tunnel system. The tunnels are the focus of a lot of Israeli propaganda, so let's start there. The use of tunnels in warfare isn't a modern phenomenon. There are historical examples that go back 3,000 years, and there are many lessons to be learned from those who came before. According to Dr. Osama al-Nahas, an Egyptian engineer and professor of architecture with 40 years of experience studying underground tunnel systems, Hamas studied the history of tunnel warfare in preparation for their own underground network. A well-known historical example of a complex tunnel system are the ancient underground cities of Cappadocia in modern-day Turkey. The Cappadocia region was a busy area with merchants crossing through year after year as they traded goods along the Silk Road. This economic activity became a target for many raiders and invaders seeking to rob the people of their riches. To protect themselves, they built a sophisticated network of tunnels underground. There are reportedly over 40 underground tunnels in this region that date back to 800 BC, nearly 3,000 years ago. Believed to originally have been built to store food, water, and other supplies as a form of protection against invaders. Invaders would besiege these tunnels for up to 6 months and have no success in starving the defenders out. So for centuries, these tunnels served as a defensive bulwark, and over time they would become entire cities, complete with multiple floors, ventilation, food, water, and secret passageways, running up to 120 meters or 400 feet deep. These cities could presumably house up to 20,000 people. Now keep in mind, these tunnels were built by ancient peoples using only their hands and basic tools, with no modern technology, engineering, or architectural knowledge. Now, Vietnam in the 1970s provides a modern case study of the successful use of tunnels in warfare. Over the 10-year course of the Vietnam War, the US dropped 7 million tons of explosives, destroying 25% of its massive rainforest. It was the largest aerial bombardment in human history. To survive, the Viet Cong made extensive use of tunnels 20, 30, and even 50 meters deep. These tunnels were built to provide natural ventilation systems and air conditioning underground, no electricity needed. To hide the smoke from cooking food underground, for example, the Vietnamese used a network of bamboo sticks to carry the smoke far away from the tunnel itself and release it above the surface. Pilots or observers above ground would see this smoke and then drop bombs on it, thinking they discovered the site of a tunnel. What they didn't realize, however, was that the tunnel was 50 or 100 meters away. And because of these ventilation systems, the hot air would naturally travel upwards, allowing for cooler air to enter and drop below. So regardless of the temperature on the surface below ground, the temperature was largely steady at a very cool 70 degrees. The Vietnamese also developed traps for the troops seeking to infiltrate the tunnels. When soldiers would scout near a tunnel, they would fall victim to camouflaged traps in the ground, consisting of spikes, nails, or other sharp objects which would pierce and slice their limbs, setting them up for ambush by fighters lying in wait. Fear of these traps and ambushes resulted in many soldiers refusing to seek out the tunnels. And for all their destructive power, the American bombs were essentially useless against these tunnels. The ground would absorb much of the shockwave of the blast. Even bombs specifically designed for bunker busting, the shockwaves largely dissipate over 20 meters. This is how Vietnamese resistance survived over a decade of relentless bombing campaigns by the world's greatest superpower. These historical models of Cappadocia and Vietnam informed the resistance engineers and architects who developed the underground tunnel network that currently houses Hamas and other resistance groups in Gaza. Before Hamas engineered them, they would conduct geological surveys to determine what kind of soil they were dealing with in a given area. They would also determine how deep they could dig before hitting groundwater. You see, the closer you are to the coast, the higher the groundwater is, meaning tunnels generally cannot go lower than 20 or 30 meters. Further inland, however, these tunnels can go 40, 50, 60, or even 100 meters deep. The deeper you go, the less effective Israel's bombs become. Now you might be wondering, how on earth did they hide the digging of these tunnels from the Israelis, who surveil the Gaza Strip 24/7 with drones, cameras, and satellites? Well, firstly, they use pneumatic jackhammers and even tunnel boring machines, the same tool used by the Russians to dig their miles-long defense trench line that thwarted the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. When digging tunnels, however, soil needs to be removed from the area. To hide this activity from the Israelis, Hamas would have these tunnel entrances covered by tents, trees, or solid structures where they could remove the soil. At nightfall, they would transport this soil to other parts of the city. Okay, now what about all the concrete they had to pump in to build the tunnels? To conceal their activities from the Israelis and make construction efficient, they pre-made the concrete walls piece by piece so they could quickly drop them in and connect them, kind of like a Lego set. And to make the foundations even stronger, machines were used to compress the sand and soil. Combined with concrete walls, this made for very durable impenetrable tunnels that could survive shockwaves from bombs and prevent collapse. So you're probably wondering, why can't the Israelis just flood the tunnels? Well, they tried. We've seen numerous clips of the IDF pumping seawater into the entrance of the tunnels. But believe it or not, this tactic actually isn't all that effective. And it's another ingenuity learned from Vietnam, where the US tried the same thing, only to fail. During tunnel assembly, the engineers were careful to leave little gaps in the concrete walls. These gaps allow water to escape the tunnels and seep into the soil. This water is then absorbed by the earth and makes its way to the groundwater below. Now, obviously, this is very destructive to the environment, but so is warfare. They also have doors that can be sealed, preventing water from flooding deeper into the tunnel network. So the benefit of flooding the tunnels is oftentimes only temporary at best. Now, some people wonder how these tunnels can be adequately and discreetly ventilated without electricity. After all, Saddam Hussein was found in an underground tunnel after an above-ground ventilation system was discovered by the American forces. In some cases, resistance tunnels do have ventilation systems powered by electricity coming from above or underground generators. But they knew that this was a potential weakness, and so they improvised to create systems of natural ventilation. By making very small openings of about 8 to 10 inches at the surface, you can create a small system or network of natural ventilators that allow the tunnels to breathe. And because the ventilation holes are so small, the resistance can cover them above ground and hide them from the Israelis quite easily. Now, the Israelis still can and do locate these tunnels and their ventilation systems, but it's a grueling, difficult, dangerous, and time-consuming process. Entrances are very small, well hidden, and booby-trapped. IDF soldiers, like the Americans in Vietnam, are afraid of ambushes and have been the butt of much mockery for the lack of infantry support moving with their tanks. And even when they do find tunnels, they have many times resorted to using drones and even dogs to investigate them. Now, Israel has claimed to have destroyed at least 20% of these tunnels. But in reality, there's simply no way that they could know this, as Hamas has never made public the number or extent of the tunnels. You might remember the massive tunnel the Israelis found in December of 2023. They claimed at the time that it was a significant tunnel important to Hamas operations, but it quickly became clear that this tunnel wasn't being used as a center of operations or anything of that nature. It was simply a large storage site where supplies could be kept. The Israelis only found it because it wasn't really well hidden. The entrance door was massive enough for a truck to drive through, and there was a road that led directly to it. Now, the tunnels the resistance fighters use come in all shapes and sizes. There are narrow tunnels that are very shallow and only cover a short distance, sometimes leading nowhere. And then there are tunnels that are larger and branch out in different directions, with multiple openings, levels, and secret doors leading to even deeper tunnels. Most importantly, the network is deliberately disconnected from one another in order to survive an Israeli invasion. So destroying one tunnel means nothing to the resistance. And there's simply no telling how many tunnels there are or how much ground they cover. The tunnels are everywhere and many times impossible to pinpoint. This is why you see tanks or even entire platoons camping right above a tunnel, unaware that a fighter below is about to dig his way up, fire a rocket, slide right back down, escape through the maze of tunnels, and exit through an opening 100 meters away. And only the local fighters know the layout of the tunnels they are assigned to. So even if they are captured and tortured as Sderot or any other concentration camp, there's no way they could ever reveal the information the Israelis need to locate and destroy the others. Which brings me to the other big advantage of the resistance. They are decentralized, cellularized, independent of one another. Squads often work in isolation from any real or imagined command structure. They have their orders. They know them in and out. There is no communication between the disparate squads, and thus very little for the Israelis to track or intercept. An Israeli commander speaking to the media is quoted as saying, "It could take 2 years to snuff out Hamas. They are operating as a decentralized node of sleeper cells." The Israelis have already killed the political leadership abroad, Yahya Sinwar on the ground, and arrested and tortured tens of thousands of men. And yet Hamas continues to operate as if nothing happened. Resistance fighters are navigating the tunnels, sleeping underground, hiding in destroyed buildings with little more than some coffee, a handful of dates, and an RPG, waiting for their chance to ambush a passing Israeli tank. So the Israelis can completely occupy a neighborhood, having killed anything that moves. But the moment they look away, resistance cells literally pop up from the ground to wreak havoc. Even with tens of thousands of troops, the Israelis cannot be everywhere at once. All of this is why Israel struggled mightily in Gaza. And it has taken a tremendous psychological toll on the IDF. 30,000 soldiers returning to Israel are said to have contacted the mental health helpline for PTSD and suicide. And desertion rates are rising because for all the destructive force at their disposal, for all the carnage they have wrought, they in many ways remain powerless because the resistance was designed for this kind of warfare. The Israelis were not. And if the past year is any indication, the Israeli military may never be willing to make the adaptations necessary to fight this kind of war in the long term, which is what occupying Gaza would require. And it's driving the Israeli government insane. This is why they have insisted on collectively punishing the entire population. They are desperate to try and force Hamas to surrender. If they can't get the fighters, they'll go for the civilians. But no amount of pressure seemed to have forced Hamas to accept anything short of a permanent ceasefire. They know that no assurance from the West is safe to trust. After all, the West has feigned powerlessness to stop the Israelis from their genocidal campaign, all the while providing them with more and more weapons. So the resistance was not happy to have experienced this, but they trained and prepared for such a scenario for nearly 2 decades. Because for the resistance, this has been their reality for 75 years. So even if this temporary ceasefire falls apart, they could keep fighting for another 6 months, a year, maybe 2, perhaps even longer. No one really knows. Because at this point, after a genocide has taken the lives of so many men, women, and children, most of the people of Gaza have nothing to live for except resistance. So regardless of how many atrocities or how much destruction Israel inflicts on Gaza, Hamas and the resistance have the upper hand, in a way, because all they have to do is survive. All the while, the Israeli casualties and injuries are mounting. Only time will tell. So what do you think? Is the resistance capable of continuing this fight? Has Israel suffered an irreversible economic and political collapse without accomplishing their goals? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Now, as you know, our channel is severely shadow banned and censored, so please, if you liked this video and want to see more, hit that subscribe button now. And if you want to go even further in supporting our media work, head on over to our website and make an account now so you can watch exclusive behind the scenes content, documentaries, and podcasts that are not available here on our channel. Until next time.